Hello team, welcome to an atypical philosopher video. I'm not used to saying that because this channel has been gathering a few cobwebs recently because I've been so into the war in Ukraine and US politics. So this conversation I'm going to be having tonight is possibly going to be posted on my other channel as well because it's actually just as relevant to that one. Here I talk about the philosophy of religion, talk about um, all, I've just got my own channel coming back into one of my ears there. So I talk about the philosophy of religion and so on and so forth. And we're going to be talking about cults and religions and the difference between those two. But we're also going to be connecting this to the possibility that there is a cult that is very, very active in the political landscape in the US, and there could well be a cult leader. So we're going to be talking a lot about politics as well as cults and topics concerned with that. So without further ado, welcome Chris. This is the second time I've spoken to Chris. We spoke previously about his experience being in Scientology and coming out of that, and which is absolutely fascinating. And I ask people to go and check that conversation we had out on this channel previously. And there's many conversations he had all over the internet. He's prolific, has his own channel, which is, you can see here, Chris Shelton, MSc, Cults, Coercive Control, Recovery, Offering Reason in an Unreasoned World. So that's enough from me. Chris, thanks so much for coming on. Do you want to tell the audience a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. I was born into, or not, pretty much raised in a Scientology family. And so nobody ever really asked me growing up if I wanted to be a Scientologist or not, but I got involved in it and it was a major part of my life for the first 42 years of my life until I escaped about 11 years ago now. And have been basically dedicating my life to fighting back against destructive cults and undue influence ever since. The first thing most people do when they come out of cults is try to sort out what happened to them. And I've been spending a lot of time sort of documenting that journey on my YouTube channel and a book that I wrote about Scientology, and lots, as you said, I've gone on lots of shows and done lots of talks about this because I want people to understand that these groups that we call destructive cults are real. They're out there, and they're not all just, I don't know what ideas people have about these things, but they're prolific. They're out there, and we need to know about them, and we need to know about how they work, and we need to know how to protect ourselves against them. And that's kind of what I've put my professional life, forward into doing for the last many years now. That's
yeah, and of course you would have had your own personal experience of being in what could be seen as a cult in terms of Scientology, and it'd be interesting to see what your opinions on whether Scientology qualifies as a cult. So I guess the question is, well, what is a cult? I've traditionally said, well, cults are religions are cults. It's just a difference in magnitude. It's just a difference in size. But then actually I think that's rather simplistic. So perhaps you could set me straight. How would you define a cult, and where can we see the differences between cults and religions?
Absolutely. This is a great question and a common confusion. A lot of people out there will conflate religious organizations and cults right away, and that one's the other, and they're not. And I want to be clear that when I talk about cults, I'm using specific language. I don't just throw the word cult around like, oh, some group that has beliefs that I think are weird, or that I think are odd or strange or disagreeable in some fashion. That's not what a cult is. And I've actually got a page on my website where I break down a list of characteristics of destructive cults. For example, a group that displays excessively zealous and unquestioning commitment to its leader. It's not just having a leader, it's this zealot sort of fanatical idea that the leader can do no wrong and that they are, infallible. This is a characteristic of cults. Or the idea that if you question what's going on, the dicta, the rules, the laws, the pronouncements of the cult leader, if you disagree with those, you're going to find yourself on the short end of a lot of very hard questions and suspicions, and even worse, because you can't question the leader. This is part of excessive belief and, and fanaticism.
Which on that
yeah.
point, I sorry to interrupt, but on that
Yeah.
point, I guess that's where you can connect that to Scientology, because one of the famous things about Scientology is that they chase you once you come out of that, or give criticisms. They have what's that called when they do that?
Oh, well, they have the fair gaming practice when they come after you.
yeah, exactly. So that that immediately spoke to me when you mentioned that.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the kind of thing that's an exact demonstration of what I'm talking about, is you have people who are so deep into a mindset or a belief set that their morality changes and the ends justify the means. Anything necessary to get what I need or what I want becomes good or real or correct or factual. That's how cult members bend reality to their point of view. And unfortunately, reality doesn't bend so easily. but in the bubble world that a cult member will create around themselves, they're up is down, black is white, freedom is slavery, all the things that George Orwell warned us about in 1984 are reflections of a cult mindset.
So, sorry, I did interrupt you. You were going down your list there, useful list.
Oh, yeah. Just a couple other points. There's many of them, and I'm not going to go over all of them here. But for example, another thing that you will find scattered throughout any sort of cult is methods of shutting down thinking. There's phrases or words that take on special significance or meaning. We're going to be talking about Trump, I imagine, here, right? So you have phrases like "Let's go, Brandon." That just shuts down thinking. It's not a phrase. It's called a thought-stopping cliche. It literally stops the thinking, right? So we're not going to engage with any ideas or policies or facts of things that happen in the real world. We're going to invent phrases that allow us to just laugh it off, slough it off, not think about it. And then I don't have to engage with facts. I don't have to engage with debate or reasoned discourse, right? And that's a key part of any cult situation, is that they actually give you these thought-stopping cliches. We had hundreds of them in Scientology, things that just, you say it and then you don't have to think anymore. And people like these things. They use them all the time in all different contexts, but cults really specialize in this. And it's done purposefully to get members specifically, to not think.
To not question, because
mean
that's your short-term thing, isn't it? Where you have, as you say, these phrases that shut down further conversation and further inquiry, and that inoculates the cult member from being able to leave the cult, right? It's a bit like putting up, so say Russia at the moment is putting up this iron curtain of information, right? So it's one way of doing that, is you can inoculate people by literally making them unable to get on the internet to see certain things, or you can shut down conversations. A longer term one that I've seen in religion quite often, particularly with Christianity, but I wonder whether this was the same with Scientology, and I don't know if this works with the political scenario we're talking about, which is, you can't go to college. You shouldn't go to college. It's liberal. College is just, university is liberal, and you'll become a deviant and so on and so forth. And it's just the height of degeneracy. And of course, what you're doing there is, on a long-term basis, you're shutting down critical thinking. That's
exactly right. In fact, you point out another really important characteristic of groups that might not be so good for you. Let's put it that way, right? When you have any group, any individual, say even in relationships, this happens, who are trying to bind your choices. They're trying to limit where you can look, what you can see, what you can be exposed to. This is a red flag of magnitude in any group or situation when people are trying to censor your views of things or your ideas about things, or even your own language. This can, and I'm not a free speech absolutist. There's always lines in the sand we have to draw in order to get along with each other. There's things you just shouldn't be saying to kids, but I'm not talking about free speech right now. I'm talking about limiting your ability to think. And behavior control, information control, thought control, like these are characteristics of these groups. And information control specifically, they want to limit what you can and can't look at or be exposed to. And Scientology really went to town on that one, for example. I didn't even have internet access for many, many years because they wanted to purposefully limit the amount of information I had access to.
Yeah, and it's funny because when you start going towards looking at the political dynamics concerning, say, MAGA, Trumpism, and whatnot, it's not so much that you can't go and look elsewhere. So maybe there's a difference between top-down kind of directives, right, and having agency yourself. So there are lots of people that live in information bubbles, like self-select into information bubbles, maybe that watch Fox News, and that's all they watch. And therefore that completely constrains their ability to critically think or their ability to know about that which is outside their information bubble. That's not a directive from down on high, although there is a pressure towards that. But yeah, I don't know, there's a similarity there.
You're absolutely right. And what you're speaking to right now, or at least a way of talking about this, is what the members bring to the equation. Because a cult is not just about what a leader is doing to his or her followers. A cult is a codependent relationship. The membership needs the leader just as much as the leader needs the followers. Right. So in-group, out-group, thing, not to get all technical and sociological.
Oh, no, we talk about a lot here, but yeah, so please do.
Yeah, okay, good, right? So you have in-group and out-group, and this is classic human behavior. This isn't just culty stuff, right? We all do this. We all have our tribes. We have our groups. We have our family. We have our hobby groups. We have our workplace. We have groups we want to be, that we all sign up and become part of. And once we do that, no matter what characteristic or idea we're gathering around, whether it's everybody's got blue eyes or whether it, just some random thing, or whether it's, hey, I like bowling. Let's all get together and do bowling, right? Whatever it is, the second you do that, your brain turns on a whole bunch of stuff that makes your side good and everybody else bad, right? This is in-group, out-group, and this is just classic human behavior. It's tribalism. Cults build on that instinct. We don't have to think about in-group, out-group. It just happens. Sports teams are all about this. And there's nothing inherently evil or wrong about grouping or tribalism. It's what we do with it that makes things go nuts. And when you take that tribalism instinct and you dial it up to 11, where us versus them, where my tribe is not just, better than everybody else. It's the only one that matters. It's the only one that has the truth. It's the only one worth living. This kind of thinking, that's when you have dialed it up too far and you enter into this extremist headspace. And the followers are just as responsible for making that happen within themselves as the leader is. The leaders, and the social pressures of the group are pushing the person, but they're the ones making the decisions to become part of the group and go further and further down the line. So responsibility for this ultimately lies with both ends of this. The problem with the decision making in cults is that the followers are being lied to constantly. So they're making these decisions and they are responsible for their decisions, but they are not informed. It's not decisions based on informed consent.
Yeah, garbage in, garbage out. So if you're lied to then and disinformed, then you are not going to be making optimal decisions based on, the inputs into your kind of function machine. Like my mate Rob here says, and you've kind of talked to this already by saying, hey, look, tribalism isn't prima facie bad, right? Tribalism is there are evolutionary arguments for, you know, the functional use of tribalism in terms of, you know, kin selection and so on and so forth. So
Absolutely.
I wonder what the evolutionary usefulness function, even if it is misfiring, might be. And I think that that's exactly it. So cults are a kind of misfiring of something that is otherwise evolutionarily, at least in our history, has been useful for us, which is to form into very tight-knit communities, and it's us against them. And that allows our community to succeed against possibly a competing community.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And when we look at destructive cults, we're looking at leadership that goes out of its way to use manipulative techniques on the followers. I mean, let's be clear that nobody stumbles into a destructive cult. It doesn't happen by accident. The leadership always is aware of the fact that they are lying, that they are deceitful, and that they are manipulating the followers into decision-making that they wouldn't otherwise make or do. That part is always part of the picture.
Interesting. So, okay, were you still going down some of, were there a couple more lists?
Sure. Yeah. In terms of some other characteristics here that we could go over. Here you have another characteristic of this is that the leadership is dictating behavior to the followers who willingly take it on. Dress codes, how to talk, how to speak to each other, how to interact with the outside world, quote unquote, right? This kind of it becomes a little authoritarian here, right? Like you have to be this way, you have to dress this way, you have to do these things. Sometimes it becomes just kind of symbolic. You have these red hats that the MAGA wears, right? And that's always kind of a sign, a little bit of a sign of the cult, right? It's not like it's required that you wear the red hat, but then again, you know, are you really a Trumpster if you're not flying your colors, right?
Even I guess it works the other way as well. So like if you are, I mean, this is kind of talk about tribalism and in-group out-group psychology just in general, but if you're kind of a woman with short hair that's dyed blue like this, you're like, oh, there's a liberal. And you know, turning up to a MAGA rally, you're going to be like, are you really supposed to be here? So there are kind of these ideas. And likewise, if someone turns up with a MAGA cap, obviously to a Democratic rally, then he's going to be like, yeah, you ain't. So interesting that we do signal virtue.
That's exactly right. But and it's an identification point. It's symbolic. But just as a contrast point here, as far as bringing up the left versus the right just now, you're absolutely right. These are symbols and identity makers or branding or, you know, a lot of words we can use for this. But one interesting difference between the left and the right on this is that there is only one way to show, you know, your support for Trump with the red hats, whereas on the left you have a rainbow of expression, right? It's not dictated specifically and precisely in exactly the same way as it is in a cult, right? Just to kind of differentiate those two things.
That's so bloody important, Chris, because actually what you're doing there is you're deferring to, I mean, we could use, say, Jonathan Haidt's political psychology here, where he talks about there are these different elements of how we can categorize ourselves as small c conservatives, small l liberals, right? Where a conservative will be much better identified by adherence to tradition, purity. So you can talk about these things in terms of a cult, purity, you know, and you have to wear this, and that's as pure a sense of who you are, and these kind of elements. Whereas liberals are often also not so authoritarian looking. And so it's often thought that, you know, trying to the reason why for example, the Republicans in America have been much better at messaging over time is that they've generally, I'm not talking recently where MAGA's kind of splintered it, but generally they've been much more united, and they find it easier to message in a unified way. Whereas the left has a tendency to be like herding cats, where everyone's got their sense of like anti-authoritarian, anti-establishment. And they're like, no, I believe this, I believe this, I want to look like this, I want to look like this. And actually, it's exactly what you're saying, which is there are many ways to be on the left, but often on the right there's a more of a unified conformity. Is that fair?
I would say that the right has, yes, I do think that's fair, and I would say that it's more that it's an inherent characteristic even of right versus left, because left is classically progressive, future-minded, thinking into the future, and constantly changing things, whereas conservatism, by definition, big C or small c, but especially small c, is all about keeping things the way they are. And here's the problem with that is this universe don't let you do that, right? It does, nothing stays the same. So it's the push and pull, right, of the progress versus, you know, keeping what works, and what works is very subjective.
So that's absolutely great point. And were there any more of those bullet points?
Oh yeah. Okay, so we were talking about controlled behavior, and the fact that a cult leader or cult leadership will often dictate how you should look, how you should act, how you should marry, how you should treat your kids, raise your kids. I mean, they often get into that. Even in the ideological circles now, because they are becoming more totalist. And a totalist system is one which actually seeks to control every aspect of your life, not just your political life or your religious life or your family life, but all of it. They want all of it. And that's Scientology, for example, is a totalist system. Almost every destructive cult is. It becomes a lifestyle choice, not just something you're doing in one part of your life.
Well, this is where the idea of, scare quotes, traditional values comes in terms of, like, here we have an idea of who you can love, what a family looks like. This is happening a lot I do a lot of talking about the war in Ukraine and Russia and Ukraine, etc., etc. One thing Russia's done that appeals to the MAGA community, for example, is that they've gone hard in on this kind of nationalistic traditional values movement and trying to embed that within a Christian nationalism, where they're also, I think, possibly driven maybe by a demographic issue of not having enough children, etc., etc., which is feeding into this. You can't have childlessness, so they've literally outlawed childlessness as you cannot espouse it in public on TV and anything. You can't do an advert which would somehow like see childlessness in a positive light. And so this is exactly what you're saying. There's kind of totalitarian worldview where, like, we will dictate all aspects of your life. And there are certainly, I presume you would argue, elements of that within MAGA, within you can't have abortions, you can't, you know, you were restricting your freedom so that you have to look like this, do this, etc., etc.
Very much so. The more, let me put it this way: any group, right, has cost of membership. What's it going to take to be a member? What is required of you? Is it membership dues? Is it that you have to show up wearing the hat? Is it, you know, that you have to have a certain skill? What is it that makes you a member of this group? The more defined that identity is, the more it's like a suit you have to put on. These are the rules. Here's how you're supposed to look. Here's how you're supposed to act. Do say this. Don't say this. Do this. Don't do this, right? The more of this that's being piled on you, the bigger the chance is that you're in a cult. But okay, again, it's taking choices away from you. You don't get to wear whatever you want. You don't get to talk to your kid the way you think you should. You have to do it the way the master says to, right? The guru, the leader, that kind of thing.
But then, like, so Rob here would say, well, the comeback could be that, is this not true of extremes of authoritarian leftism, whereby, or not even authoritarian leftism, but the kind of, I don't like this term because I think it's overused and misunderstood. But what you hear from the right is, the woke left, and this anti-wokeism, whereas, like, the woke left say that you can't say this, and if you say this then you get lambasted. But there are certainly elements of this identitarian kind of tete-a-tete we all seem to have in public spaces. So is Rob right here in saying that actually there is an element of this on the left too?
Yes, he is. Now, that being said, let me clarify, because this can often be misunderstood and turn into a both sides argument. And that would be Incorrect. Any spectrum. Okay, so let's lay this out really super clearly. Any spectrum, by definition, has extreme ends. You have center thinking in the middle, which isn't left or right. The farther you go on the right, the more extreme, the more committed, the more solid those beliefs are, until you're at a point at the end of the spectrum where there is no questioning this at all. It's a full 100% commitment.
It's like a singularity almost on each end of the spectrum, isn't it?
Yes.
Like, you know, there is just this is all you can be, rather than in the middle, the bell curve of like this variation. But yeah, sorry.
Exactly. No, that's exactly right. And the left has the same extreme end, right? You have like extreme, what is it? I don't know, extreme communism, right? Over on the left. And you have like extreme, like Nazi socialism, whatever, you know, on the right, right? So you've got equally disagreeable ends, right? Extremes. Now, the reality of the world that we live in is that in the United States, there is very little that is actually all the way over to the left. All my European friends have really done a very good job of educating me over the years on the fact that
this is true.
American left is not left. It is
they'll have you know that CNN
right,
is, they'll have you know that CNN is communist. But the reality is that us Europeans would be like, the CNN is so deeply corporate centrist.
Exactly.
But what happens is there's this skewed worldview of people on the sort of MAGA right that looks at anything to the left of Trump is communism.
Exactly right. That's what I'm talking about. Is thank you for saying it that simply, because that's exactly right. The more towards the extreme left or right that you go, the more extreme everybody else looks. Because you're in a headspace where you can't tolerate disagreement. Yeah. And this is not just political or religious. This is anywhere in our lives. If you're in anywhere in your life where you cannot be disagreed with because it's just the truth with a capital T, I would very, very seriously invite you to please take a look at that again.
Boom. Right, Chris. Boom. I wrote, unfortunately, Only Sky no longer exists in its original form, but I used to write for Only Sky. I write for their new iteration. But so my articles are lost in the ether, but they are going to be resurrected on my own website. So I have something like 5,000 articles to pump onto the information space. But I wrote a couple of articles on criticism of Trump being blasphemy, right? And this, which I think really feeds into kind of where your position is as a cult leader. And we'll talk about, you know, we'll make sure we got those bullet points finished, and then talk about whether Trump qualifies as such. But but just for now, like, it's this idea that as you say, like, if you are inoculating yourself or your cult leader or your religion from criticism, that is a form of blasphemy. So there's this kind of religious element to that you cannot do that. That is, like, literally, it is against the law of God. So actually, often when I criticize like Trump to people who are so deep in that worldview, it's like, I can't handle that. There's too much cognitive dissonance in my mind, and therefore this can't happen. And we're all going to pile in on you. And this is a form of inoculating ourselves from hearing this criticism. Would that be fair?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. People get overly committed to ideas. One thing that, you know, I like to give out general advice. I try to help people, right? I'm trying to help people to avoid falling into a cult headspace. I've been in a cult headspace, and I spent decades there. It's not a good place to be. And so I really want to do everything I can to try to prevent people from going there. Left, right, center, I don't really care. It's just not a good place to be in an extremist headspace. And so my general advice for people when it comes to, you know, committing to ideas or ideologies or religious beliefs is always leave a crack open for questions. Always be willing to question what you're doing or what you're saying or what you're thinking, because a cult member doesn't. That's the thing that makes a cult member a cult member. If you want one thing that it comes down to, it's they will never question their beliefs, ideas, or dogma.
Yeah. But
right?
So on sort of connected to that,
Mm-hmm.
I've written pieces on this before whereby there's psychological evidence to suggest that certainty in our beliefs is actually something that gives us greater contentment. And what happens is a kind of bell curve, and the more sure of your, so when you talk about say, Christians have often said, so in my kind of atheistic writings, I've often talked about how Christians claim that they're happier, but actually that isn't quite true, and the devil's in the details of these studies, whereby the more sure you are in your Christian belief, actually the happier you are, and the more sure you are as an atheist, like a militant atheist, actually you're equally happy. And it depends on your social networks and all these other things as well. It's really what often creates your happiness. But when you are more uncertain, actually that's what leads you to have not as sure of a sense of contentment, which is a problem, because actually we don't want to be overly certain. We want to leave that door open, like you say. So is there an element that, a bit counterintuitive here, that actually people in cults might actually be happier? Is that a benefit to being in a cult?
That's an interesting question. All right, let me think about that for a second, because the question sort of almost implies, nah, not really. Doesn't really go there, does it? Okay, let me say this. Certainty is a bit of a trap, because the thing about the human existence is it's always changing, as I mentioned earlier, right? Nothing stays the same, and that applies for knowledge as much as anything else. Things are always changing, and we're always learning new things and growing and expanding our beliefs and ideas as a result. The march forward of science and that sort of thing, right? People get really upset when science changes on them, even though that is literally the model. It's a feature, not a bug of science, that it changes. Certainty is wanting or needing, it's an emotional thing, and it's a feeling of needing something to stay the same, for it to be what it is, and I know it and understand it and grasp it and have my wits around it, and there it is, and I don't have to think about it anymore. I don't have to think about it anymore. I'm sure this is how it is. And this expresses itself in various silly ways as well as in good ways. The Bible said, God said it, the Bible wrote it, and the thinking is done.
Yeah.
That would be an example of certainty being, pushing towards ignorance, really, because I don't have to think. I just read the words and everything's fine. And I can be quite certain that my life, will be great as long as I do that. And people are raised with those ideas that as long as I just, take the wheel, Jesus.
Right? Blissful ignorance. But of course, as you might say, happiness doesn't necessarily have an interest in truth. So there are competing things going on.
Yeah, people can be very, very happy,
but wrong
all the way up until it doesn't work for them. They run into a situation where Jesus doesn't take the wheel, where L. Ron Hubbard's advice doesn't work, where Trump doesn't have the answer. And then they don't know how to think their way out of that or figure their way out of that, because they didn't think their way into it. Yeah. They not think their way into it, if that makes sense, right? They weren't thinking. And when you have to turn the engine on in the middle of the emergency, it's just another problem, and it makes it a little hard. Because cult solutions don't really solve the problems of life. They only pretend to. And so it sounds like it makes sense. It sounds like it's a solution, whether it's Scientology's, PTS, deal with all the antisocials, or it's Scientology's solution for study. They have this whole thing in Scientology about how to study. I'm not even kidding. There's like a book worth of information in the Church of Scientology about how to study something. Right. And it's so stupid. And one of the key points of it is, that you can't go past a word you don't understand. And if you do, then, nothing's going to make sense and it's all going to be awful and you're not going to study well. And that works all the way up until the moment that it doesn't. And once you run into a study problem or understanding barrier that doesn't solve, suddenly you're not so certain anymore. And suddenly that veneer of happiness that you thought you had because you have the solutions to all the problems doesn't work for you anymore. And that's when cracks start appearing. But that's also why the happiness is a fake kind of happiness. It only works for as long as the facade.
Yeah, and
works.
I guess
it's kind of what I'm trying to say. I'm going on a big long tangent to make
that's
point.
Really interesting, because in a sense, if the happiness is derived from the certainty, but the certainty itself is only relatively shallow, right?
Yes.
Then actually your happiness is somewhat shallow. It's not really built on deep foundations of fulfillment of life and so on and so forth. It's built on a kind of facade. You pull back the curtain and suddenly, oh my God, I can't be happy now because this. So it's not really giving you the tools for a long and lasting happiness.
Exactly. When you put together the sort of building blocks of what we've talked about so far, where you have thought-stopping cliches, you have dictatorial dogma from an authoritarian leader that is seeking to take total control of your life, there's not a lot of thinking going on here, right? And what that means is that you're not really engaged as yourself. You're putting on a suit of clothes. You're putting on a veneer. You're putting on a personality that isn't you. And that's what it is to be in a cult. And that's why it doesn't provide real answers or solid answers or solutions to your life. It's just, it's all veneer. That's the best word I got for it.
Chris, I think we've won life. As Hunter Green here says, I wish these two were running for president. Jonathan, go back in time and be born in the US.
Thank you. I appreciate
someone asked me today, Chris, because I talked about how I was going to have this chat with you on one of my videos. And someone said, because I have on my other channel, I've got a really lovely community. They're called The Team. My team are just a wonderful bunch of people and we're really supportive. And someone said, have you ever wondered whether it's a bit like, I don't know if you've seen, there's a famous comedy sketch where Mitchell and Webb, these two British comedians, they're dressed up in SS uniforms and they're in this kind of bunker, and one turns to the other and says, if you looked at what we're wearing, have you ever wondered whether we're the baddies?
Yes, it's like a meme of that. It's hilarious. Yeah,
it's a brilliant sketch, and this guy on my thread today is like, are we in a cult? like as I'm like doing all these videos and I've got this lovely team around, and I'm like, right. I don't know, I'll be a cult leader. But actually,
right.
So anyway, back to where we were. So are there any, before we go full on into whether this applies fully to say MAGA and Trump, are there any more bullet points to
oh yeah, let's just take a quick look here and see if there's any other specific things. Oh yeah, okay. Obviously, the group has a polarized us versus them mentality. The leader is not accountable to any other authorities. The leader is the authority. And that's an important point, especially with Trump. There's nobody over him. Nobody can reel him in. Nobody can control him, all that kind of crap, right?
Well, it's not just that. It's like, this is right. Goodness me, each of these points we could spend like half an hour, 2 hours on. Like, so for that one, I love conversations like this, Chris. So for that one, you've got the Supreme Court. So the SCOTUS of America, of the US, has helped Trump to become immune, like the immunity ruling. And this is a way of inoculating himself from criticism, from accountability. He's almost becoming like a constitutionally enforced cult leader.
Yes, that was one of the biggest things that disturbed me about that Supreme Court decision. I didn't take that lightly. That was straight up authoritarian gatekeeping for Donald Trump. And John Roberts, the head of our Supreme Court, is, I am obscenely upset with them. It is a corrupt body that is enabling a cult, and they have no excuse.
And John Roberts, as the kind of lead, as a head Supreme Court justice, is now seen as like the moderate one. Like, this is like the disturbing thing. If you look at his rulings and his statements back decades, right, the guy is way over here. But
Oh, yeah.
when you see who Trump has put in since then, he's like, oh, yes. Although Amy Coney Barrett has actually been fairly moderate recently, which is bizarre, but it just shows that there are some absolutely bonkers people in there. Anyway, I digress.
Yes. Understood. And yes, it was packed that way on purpose. There were enablers. Trump is not alone in this, and that's one of the key things to know about Trump and his cronies and crew is he has a whole pack of enablers and has from the very beginning, and they're just as much part of what he's doing as he is.
Could that be a difference then? Could that, or is this typical? So I'm interested. Question. Just thought that. Actually, you're absolutely right. So there are people like, I would argue, the Heritage Foundation, Steve Bannon, Steve Miller. I could name
Stone, Paul Manafort.
Yeah, all of these people who are behind Trump, who are, is it what's his name? The head of the Heritage Foundation, not Roberts. You just mentioned him. Anyway.
Paul.
No, it's not Paul.
The other one.
Anyway, I'll think about him. But anyway, the guy that's behind Project 2012. All these people are behind Trump that actually want Trump to succeed, but they're not like too interested in Trump. So they're not like adulatory towards Trump, but that he is a vehicle for their own ideology.
Right.
And I don't know if that tracks across to cults particularly. There are often, like, cults seem to be much more top down, where the ideology is coming from the central person, and there aren't necessarily these layers back. You might get some issues going on with the top level management here, but this is almost like the people understand it is a cult, but it's a cult that's being manipulated by a nefarious, like, super cult.
It is. It's an interesting model because there's a lot of different ways of framing or modeling cults. There's like 20 or 30 different models, a dime a dozen. But the bottom line is you're dealing with a codependent relationship between an abuser, predator figure or leadership and followers. And the followers take on the personality psychologically of the leader. They start taking on character traits and want to be like the cult leader. The codependency is deep. It's not a surface level thing, right? The veneer of the belief is pretty surface, but the commitment is full. It's total. So you have people who do change as a result of being in this kind of group situation, this intense social situation with a lot of social pressure being brought on the members by the members. It's not just coming from the top down. And QAnon is an example of a leaderless cult. I mean, there are leader figures, there are symbols and figureheads in this anonymous figure Q, in Trump, in various other sub-leaders that kind of rose in that world, right? The breadcrumb guys and the interpreters and all that stuff. It's sort of created itself online, its own little weird framework. A populist movement like Trump's is similar. He's a figurehead. It's not Donald Trump, the individual that they are following. It's a figurehead and a symbol. And often in cults, it's that way anyway. But with Trump, it really stands out that way. They apologize for him as a human being while worshiping him as a symbol. And that's an interesting thing, right? Because in most cults, the human being that is thought of as the cult leader is a perfect, infallible person, or is somebody who is somehow senior to the rest of us. L. Ron Hubbard, genius philosopher, brilliant researcher, magnanimous philosopher, all these labels you can assign that make them senior. Donald Trump's base understands that he is a flawed individual, to say the least.
When the man is literally on the hot mic said, grab pussies and all that, you're like, okay,
exactly.
They've got to deal with that. So therefore,
they apologize for all of it, right?
Yeah,
they just doesn't exist. They don't have to engage with it because they don't see him as a person. They see him as a symbol. And I just wanted to stress that point.
That's really interesting because there is all sorts of cognitive dissonance reduction. So to remind the audience, cognitive dissonance is where you have a core belief in your mind and then you have evidence against that core belief. And then what happens when this dissonance, this disharmony generates, and you have to do cognitive dissonance reduction. And usually your core belief remains, which is in this case that Donald Trump is the be all and end all. So what happens when he says things like grabbing pussies? What happens when he goes to court and is found guilty on 34 counts? Guilty by a jury of his peers, or he's found liable for sexual abuse, all that stuff. Okay, how do I deal with that? And there are all these different ways to get rid of that evidence. But at some point there has to be this understanding that he is flawed compared to, say, a Jesus figure who wouldn't have been talking about grabbing pussies. Like, it wouldn't have been caught on camera, you would have thought, saying stuff like that. So there is a difference there, but it's
and still... even the flaws become features, not bugs. That's the thing with a Trump leader, with a cult leader like Trump, is you'll get people who will go into the truly fanatic zones where, oh no, Trump has never lied. Trump always tells the truth. Trump never does anything wrong. That's you're so far gone, you're not even like in reality anymore. But before that, you have, well, yeah, he says things I may not all fully agree with, but there's always a but.
Yeah.
Right? ... And these are people...
It's right when my dad says, I'm not racist, but, and I'm like, oh, here it comes. Here it comes.
That's right. It's exactly that, right? Is here you have a populist figure who has said so many disgusting things that appeal to so many people who have those same kind of disgusting views, that it is coalesced into this sort of, massive awful. But it's interesting that it's a bunch of different factioned groups that would never normally have come together. But they come together under Trump, right? And a lot of that comes from a prior hatred, you could say, of the left, right? It's not even about Trump, it's about not being something too.
I think I can draw both those two threads together, Chris.
Yeah.
Because that's absolutely fascinating. I was listening to Stephen Hassan, who is a cult expert, talking about how Trump is a cult leader type thing. Exactly.
Literally wrote the book on it.
Right. Yeah. He literally written a book, something like, Trump,
right.
the cult of Trump or something. So to those 2 points, he said one thing, and he was referring to someone who wrote a book in the 50s. And I think the quote from the book is, the strength of a mass movement, which is how he sees a cult. So that's the old sort of word, a mass movement. The strength of a mass movement can be measured by the vividness and the tangibility of its devil. In other words, like, what draws the cult together is not the in-group kind of positivity, but the out-group negativity. It's like the devil without. And
one creates the other.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. So
that's how you get a tight in-group, is you unite around hatred of the out-group.
Yeah, exactly. So really fascinating. And of course, you can look at the way he talks about Kamala Harris, the way he talks about the enemy within, right? So that's fascinating, which is like, we're not united against Putin and Kim Jong-un and Xi Jinping and Viktor Orban. In fact, Viktor Orban's one of my best mates. We are united against the enemy within our own country and the people who aren't in our cult. And that's fascinating. And the other thing that Hassan said was that there are, particularly in the cult of Trump and the MAGA cult, is that there are many subcults within the cult. Mm-hmm. And he talks about these evangelical Christian movements who are almost see like their church leader as a prophet to some kind of God figure of Trump, even though they've got God up here. So I don't know quite what goes on with actual God and Trump God. But he talks about there being like subcults, like you talked about with QAnon, with it's his own cult within the broader MAGA cult. And that's fascinating. Okay. So you've got these lots of different cults coalescing around this central idea that everyone outside of the larger cult is evil. But anyway.
Well, basically, that's exactly how to put that. Would be a way of mapping the whole thing. Absolutely, it's a populist movement that has cultic elements, and a big part of the cultic element are the red hats. People who run around with the red hats and fly the flags and have the 10 million bumper stickers all over their houses and their cars and that kind of thing. You just don't see behavior like that on the political left over here the same way you do on the right. It's one of the many places where we can literally point to the real world and go, yeah, not the same. It's not the same, right? There's a level of extreme commitment on the right at this time that is truly disturbing when it comes to our political life over here. Nobody, see, here's the thing about this is people go, whoa, well, you know, it's this bad on the right. It should, you know, then they have to make it that bad on the left. And my point is always, guys, no one should be this bad. No one should be this committed. We should not be having personal family arguments over political leaders. The whole situation is ridiculous because that's what Jenny, you know, riling people up to a cult level of commitment does. It destroys families. It destroys relationships. So, it blows up businesses because people can't be business partners anymore over this kind of stuff. That whole thing is so wrong. That's where we've lost our collective minds, you know.
I have a brother that is deep in MAGA, deep MAGA. We've lost contact recently, but I see this social media post, and I do not recognize the man I call my brother. I'm gutted. And there's another one of my members. I don't know if she's in here, Lynn. Surprise, it's us. I don't know if you're here, Lynn, but she's and I'm sure she's fine with me saying this because she says it on the threads public. But she is married to someone who is absolutely deep in MAGA, Fox News, and they basically live two different lives in their house, whereby they, you know, that kind of adulation of the cult has formed a tangible. I'm sorry if I'm speaking on her behalf here, but formed a tangible like dividing line between the two. And as you say, and this is exactly what cults do, you know, Mooney, Scientology, is they take a person away from their family. Although something like Scientology does it on purpose, the idea is that though maybe MAGA Trumpism doesn't do that, does it by sort of collateral, that it can end up like dividing families because it's this you're inoculated from reason, you can't be reasoned with, and therefore there's almost nothing you can do to bring that person, you know, back into the fold of your own family or something like that.
Well, no, that's exactly right. And let's be clear that MAGA does that just as hard as Scientology does. That's what it means to be a cult, is that the group is doing that, and it's doing it on purpose. It's might not necessarily see itself as a censorist, totalist, authoritarian group. They don't see themselves that way, but that's what they always inevitably become as a result of this extreme commitment to the dogma or the leader or the figurehead, right? And the belief set. So when MAGA are arguing and tearing the family apart, they're doing it for the same reasons that Scientologists are, right? You don't get it. I get it. You're all a bunch of idiots for not getting it the way I get it, so I can't even interact with you idiots anymore. That's the cult member. And whether it's a Scientologist, a Mooney, a Nexium person, or a Trumpster, this is what we run into. And yes, that same level of extremism does happen on the left with leftist beliefs, because human beings are human. And they do it over there just like they do it on the right. The problem right now in our world is that more human beings collectively are demonstrating this extremist behavior on right-wing ideological lines than they are on the left.
I think you're absolutely correct that actually looking at empirical data, this isn't just liberal lefties like myself going, isn't the right terrible type thing. But actually, just empirically speaking, there seem to be more movements where that is taking place on the right than where it's taking place on the left. And in the US, people on the left are not coalescing around a person. Like Kamala Harris it doesn't evoke a kind of cultish response from people, whereas Donald Trump does. Like there really is, I think, a big difference there. People on the left, I think, are more afraid of what's going on the right than they are like for Harris, although I think there's an awful lot of that too. Like, but it's not a cult of personality to coin that phrase. Whereas I think with Donald Trump, it is a cult of personality, and that's a very clear difference.
Very, very clear. Because I don't know anybody who's willing, for example, and I'm okay. So I'm on the political left. Am I an extremist? Absolutely not. I'm about as centrist as they come. But you just objectively don't see a level of commitment to Kamala Harris as an individual, as you just pointed out so adroitly, as you do to Donald Trump, the figurehead, the symbol, the icon, he who cannot be doubted, questioned, or, in any way ever possibly have ever done anything wrong. Right. If it came out today that Kamala Harris was like taking bribes or, doing this or doing that, throw her in prison. I couldn't care less. You know what I mean? Like, that's not how Trumpsters respond to Trump being in legal trouble. They will literally be willing to burn the entire system to the ground rather than acknowledge that Donald Trump is guilty of a felony. And yet he has already been found guilty of multiple felonies in legit courts of law, civil and otherwise. And yet these people cannot deal with that reality. It's not a biased statement on my part to say that. Just go look at them. They can't deal with it. And that's like emotionally, and it's a little disturbing to watch, especially from my position, right? Because you're like, this person needs an intervention so badly.
Yeah, But I mean, it's worth emphasizing that what we're not doing here is bashing the right, because what we're doing is we're bashing a segment of the present right in the US, right? Which is, so it's really important to say, like, this is MAGA Trumpism as opposed to republicanism. So what we didn't see is, as Jeroen Roloff says here, we didn't see a John McCain cult. Like, John McCain was a classic Republican of the old school ilk that, goodness me, would I like him back to be the foil for Kamala Harris rather than Donald Trump? Do you know what I mean? Like,
absolutely.
And even with Reagan, who had his, like, people loved a bit of Reagan in their time, but he wouldn't have qualified as a cult leader. No. Like, and Bush, certainly, like Bush Senior and Bush Junior. So what we are seeing at the moment, it seems to me, verifiably different and categorically different from what we saw previously with, like, equivalent Republican leaders. So this is a subset of Republicanism that is identifiably different.
Very much so. And I think the phrase that's been bandied about for years on this has been that it's a populist movement, right? It's grassroots, that sort of thing. I have some doubts about the origin story of Trump's political aspirations and all of that, but that's neither here nor there at this point, right? He is a force to be reckoned with, and we have to, finally, hopefully, in a couple of weeks, put this thing down and never have to deal with it again, because it is never, ever, ever a good thing. Left, right, center. Like I said, I lean left. The last thing I would ever want to see is a cult leader from the left taking charge, any more than I want to see one from the right. That I hope I'm making the point in reading the various bullet points and going over the extreme belief of cults, that we don't want any of these things around on any end of political spectrums.
Absolutely. And there are so many points I just want to pick up on everything you're saying. It's brilliant. But actually, are there any more bullet points left to look at first?
Let's see if there's any other super relevant ones to what we're dealing with here. Inordinate amount of time being dedicated to it. Members are encouraged or required to live or socialize only with other group members. And here we go. And we've been kind of dancing around this particular point through most of the show here today. The most loyal members, the true believers, quote unquote, feel there can be no life outside of the context of the cult. They believe there is no other way to be, and often fear reprisals to themselves or others if they leave or even consider leaving the group. It's not like every single person in MAGA is happy to be there, but a cult's a cult. And social pressures, familial pressures, church pressures, because these are people who go to church and have their pastors tell them from the pulpit, Donald Trump is King David and you need to vote for him. He's biblical King David. You need to vote for him. This is such an egregious violation of public policy when it comes to what churches should be doing in the U.S. But at this point, it's so violated and so blatantly, preached from the pulpit, has been that way since Reagan, that it's baked into our society now, and the laws say one thing, but what is practiced is another. And so there's a tremendous, my point being, there's a tremendous amount of religious influence. You mentioned the evangelicals on Trump's base. And these are people who are already in a cult. They're in an evangelical cult. I'm talking purity culture. I'm talking about, the Duggars, the Bill Gothard, the happy, shiny people, the people whose kids are beaten into submission and forced to memorize Bible quotes their entire childhood. These kinds of families are full on Trumpsters because their deacons and pastors tell them to be. And they're already there. They're already in a compliance culture.
Yeah, interesting. It just fits, doesn't it? We are. I'm born and brought up in this religious environment where actually I'm just substituting one entity to be compliant for and to with another, and it's relatively easy. Whereas on the left, and this is where I disagree with stuff like this, because on the left I don't think there is that, because it's like herding cats. There's too much on the left. Is like, screw you, like I'm not listening to you. There's too much like anti-authoritarianism, which is why very few people on the left are going to be. It's much harder to join the armed forces being a left-wing, like militant lefty, right? Because you are armed forces are all about tradition, purity, sense of national identity, and authoritarianism. And actually, like, honestly, I know this because I come from a forces family, and my dad has taken a piss out of me for many decades for being a bit of a lefty, and he was formerly in the Navy, in the Royal Navy, and actually I've spoken to gazillions of people in the armed forces, and very few of them are avowedly left wing, because actually it psychologically doesn't make sense to. It's not the kind of framework for that. So the idea that actually the left is just the same on the left, I don't think you can get left leaning cults, I'm sure, but it's just generally not a good fit. So when Skylar here says red MAGA and blue MAGA, they're both the same, i.e. Republican, Democrat, like extremists are the same. Orange Cheeto, like Trump can do no wrong, and Biden Harris can do no wrong. I would disagree. So when you look at the present political landscape in the US at the moment, you have loads of people on the left attacking Biden and Harris on the war in Israel, on Palestine, on the there was, and loads of people saying actually the AOC kind of left, the Justice Democrats saying actually no, Biden Harris isn't quite what we want, but what we definitely don't want is Trump. So it's better the devil we know type thing. But there isn't this unified defense of Biden Harris in the same way there is of Trump. So I'd actually fully disagree with that. Sorry to digress.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You have movements and social, you have social movements and stuff that take hold on the left, just like they do on the right. You have fads that take hold on the left, just like they do on the right. And when people disagree with these things, they throw the word cult around very quickly, just like they throw the word narcissist around when somebody's a little self-absorbed. And these are two wildly different things. A self-absorbed person and a narcissist are the difference between a rock and Mount Everest, right? They're very different things. And the same with this. A cult is it's a very extreme version of a group, and not everything you disagree with is cult. Even if they have pretty strong beliefs in it, because it's not the beliefs that make a cult, it's what they do with them that makes it a cult.
Great point. Obvious, but great point. Yeah,
they got to keep saying this because people get this wrong all the time. They think
Scientology framework rather than the content.
Yeah,
is that right?
It's not the beliefs; it's what they do with it.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, brilliant. And actually, you preempted one of my main questions when we are concerning the application of cultish behavior to, for example, Donald Trump, is, as people like George Conway would say, a lot more, he's got the psychopath pack, which is doing these adverts looking at Trump's narcissistic personality disorder and saying that this is actually cultish behavior. So although there are different, as you say, that not everyone who's self-absorbed is a is a narcissist, but actually it looks very much, and I'm no psychologist, but interestingly, I have a child with pathological demand avoidance that is very similar, has loads of overlaps with narcissistic personality disorder. And actually, I can see elements of one of my own kids sadly, in Trump's behavior. And so I would armchair psychologize that Trump has narcissistic personality disorder. And is that an important component of being a cult leader?
It is a classic characteristic of cult leaders that they are narcissists. It is not required that you have an NPD analysis or, label in order to be a cult leader. But generally speaking, it's similar to how we think about, or maybe how we should be thinking about, CEOs of major companies, right? Is what does it take to become that position? Well, it takes, screwing over an awful lot of people. Who does that? Psychopaths, narcissists, people who have disorders, antisocial disorders, things where they don't really get along with other people and they're okay with that. And that's the kind of person that you usually find rising to the top when it comes to cult leadership.
Yeah, absolutely. There was a point that we sort of touched on earlier with regard to leaving a cult and whatnot. There was where is it? Let's. I just want to bring this question up. Yes, this is it. So Jeanette Brainstrom says, what, I don't know if that's pronounced correctly, I'm sorry, Jeanette. What will happen after Trump? Is there a way to save the Republican Party if he loses? So there's a really interesting conversation to be had around whether, if you cut the head off the snake, whether the snake dies. So is Trump the head of the snake, or is there a movement that would sustain beyond a cult leader in Trump? And actually, there's now people have got used to this kind of belief system whereby it would just maintain longer.
That's right. There should be a split in our Republican Party, and there are people like Liz Cheney who are kind of pushing for that. I'd be very surprised if they didn't start their own party at some point in the future. And they should, because the Republicans have very clearly factioned into never Trumpers versus Trumpers. And I don't know what the size of that is. I don't know that anybody really knows, but it would be interesting to find out. But we need that. We have needed a split, a factioning of parties in this country for well over 100 years now. So I welcome it. We need multiple parties. The two-party system has failed the United States.
Totally agree.
Because it's binary. And we should never be given only binary choices. Not in a democracy. That is ludicrous.
Humanity exists on a spectrum, and you are you're being forced to put yourself into one of two pots, and that's supposed to be representative. It's just simply not. Now, I was wondering whether Constellation Pegasus would be watching this, and because I know he said things before. So thank you very much, by the way, Constellation Pegasus, for your support of the channel. However, he's not happy. I assume it's a he. Trump is not a cult. That's far left crap. And then to add to that, Jonathan, you're way off. There's the same crap on the left and as on the right, and this is where we disagree. And I think we've kind of established that. Did you ever bring this crap up with the Democrats? This is sad, nothing but Trump bashing, and you should know better. Well, actually, no. Okay, so I want to answer this because this is important. This isn't just Trump bashing. This is, I think, authoritarian, autocrat wannabe, dictator wannabe bashing. Someone who has, I don't think, a very decent moral compass, who has been found in a court to be liable for sexual assault. And I could go through all the things that, like, this is someone who, just from a moral point of view, my own personal moral evaluation, is a bad human being, right? Who is also running to be the most important person in the world. And so therefore, I think I'm justified in saying that, and he's got cultish behaviors and so on and so forth, and the people around him are exhibiting behaviors like cult members. That is not happening on the left. I would do this with Democrats if they exhibited the same sort of behavior. But you tell me, like, the burden of proof is on you to show me where that kind of behavior is so widespread on the left as it is on the right. You tell me the person that is engendering a response from these supporters in such a way as Trump is from his supporters, and it's just not comparable. I massively disagree with that. Sorry to take over there,
Let me say this, just to maybe help with that a little bit, is there are absolutely destructive cults that exist of a left-wing ideological bent. There have been communist-based cults. There have been cults. My professor from the University of Salford was part of a political cult that was a very hardcore Marxist left-wing cult. They exist. They're out there. They're out there all over the place. There's probably hundreds of them in the United States and the UK, much less in the rest of the world. What the point today, at least that I'm trying to make about Trumpism versus left-wing cults, is not that left-wing extremism and cults don't exist. You can find blatant examples of left-wing cult behavior in a lot of social justice circles. That doesn't mean social justice is wrong or bad, because it's not about the beliefs. It's about what they do with it. So you can find that behavior on the left. I've discussed it at length in different shows. But politically speaking, in the United States at this time, and generally speaking in the world at this time, we have an authoritarian right-wing problem. We have, the Bolsonaros, the Putins, the Xis, the Kim Jong-uns, the Trumps of the world. These are right-wing, hard right, authoritarian dictator types. And they mean bad for their people. They don't treat their people well. They have very totalist ideas. And they express them very openly. They're not subtle about it. This isn't conspiracy theory. I don't think these people are all meeting together. It just so happens that the world is a little, let's have some totalitarianism right now. And it's a little bit of an effect from COVID and a little bit of other things. And we need to be fighting back and pushing back against that. It's not left versus right now. It's the right is the clear and present danger. And we need to deal with that and come back to an equilibrium. I think somebody mentioned earlier the word equilibrium. I like that word because that's a balance of power where we can have conversations and have democracy and people can actually talk about this stuff and get along. And there can be a marketplace of ideas. Cults don't allow marketplaces of ideas. With cults, it's my way or the highway. And with Trump and his ilk, that highway is something they're going to build right over the top of you. They don't care about you, right? And that's my problem with totalitarian types. And I do nothing all day but study this stuff. So that's where I'm coming from on this, just to bluntly put that out there.
And I'd have to say, and again, thank you for your support, Constellation. But I would have to say that in order to unless you want to just establish mere assertions, you need to bring receipts. So the receipts in this kind of context are that Trump, in the last couple of weeks, has come out and said, I think CBS 60 Minutes should be taken off the air, and I think CBS needs to have its license revoked. He said that there's an enemy from within, and they should be sorted out with the National Guard, and if not, the army. Right. So, and he then said, people then said, he was talking about immigrants coming in, and he said, no, I'm talking about the Pelosi's and the Adams ships. So he literally said that himself. So, and you can keep going down these kind of points that are like, right, this is authoritarianism, and this is inoculation from criticism. So the point of saying he went on Fox and Friends the other day and said, I'm going to have a word to Rupert Murdoch because I don't think Fox should be running adverts that are critical of me. He said, in the old days, Fox News didn't run adverts that were critical of me. They are now running adverts because obviously the Democrats are paying for advertising time, right? So they are running adverts that shouldn't be allowed. So I'm going to go and speak to Rupert Murdoch to stop that from happening. All of this is cultish behavior that says, right, I need to inoculate myself and my followers from criticism. I need to keep my followers in here so that they do not hear. I keep them in here as a result of them not hearing criticisms of my position. And the way I do that is controlling the information spaces and controlling their ability to ask questions and inquire and know about an alternative to me.
That's right. You got it. You absolutely nail it. And that all falls under Hassan's model in terms of information control.
Yeah.
Yep.
Which is, you know, politics, authoritarianism 101, right? This is what Putin does. Like, I can bore you to death with how Putin is controlling the information spaces, but this is what I think, you know, whether we call it a cult or just an authoritarian, I think this is an authoritarian cult, essentially. Like,
I mean, they're synonymous terms.
Yeah,
there's no such thing as a non-authoritarian destructive cult.
yeah, exactly. And so, in order to be an authoritarian, you need to shut down criticism. You need to control the information spaces, and that is what Trump is actively trying to do. Are there any areas that we haven't covered with regard to you know, bullet points and
Oh, no, we covered pretty much the bullet points in terms of characteristics of cults that I think would be applicable here today. Yeah. And you can go to my website and check it out. It's what is a cult page on my mncriticalthinking.com website. So it's all listed out there. And that checklist, what I was reading from, was put together by my predecessors who in this field.
I'm just MN Mike November criticalthinking.com. Here we go. Yes, there it is.
There it is. Yeah.
So that is there. What is a cult?
Yeah.
And here we have, you know, everything that Chris has been talking about today. So that's fantastic stuff.
Yeah, they actually got me into a tie for a picture. It was.
Oh, really? Yeah.
That's a rare photo right there of Chris in the wild wearing a tie.
I'll tell you what, in the world of YouTube these days, I'm lucky if I put a pair of trousers on. No,
right?
Obviously not true, but I'm not naked from the waist down. No, so any other particular examples of cultish behavior then that you see being exhibited in the political landscape of the US at the moment?
I think we've covered the main points. You know, the number one point is what I led with in terms of people's ability to think with this stuff, right? And shutting down thinking. And there's an awful lot of Americans right now who just aren't thinking. They're just feeling, they're just emoting, they're just reacting. And that's one more thing maybe we might want to stress about cults is, you know, I can talk about the cognitive impairments, right? The you know, and that kind of thing, but cults live in the area or of emotion. Cults are not about ideas. They're about feelings, and they're about inspiring really profound moments of unity, of awe, of euphoria. These are the things we all experience in our lives at concerts, when we fall in love, when we, you know, have those kind of moments where we're Cults try to induce those. And that's the glue that keeps people stuck to them, is those feelings. So you got to understand when you're talking to a cult member that you're not talking to somebody who's armed with a book of facts, and this is why they think the way they think. They're feeling their way through what they're doing and through their experience, and that's what sticks them to it. Feelings are far more influential and powerful for us than facts. That's just a fact. I don't want it to be that way, but it is that way. And so that's what cult leaders are really doing, is they're driving the emotions of their followers more than the thinking of their followers, if that makes sense.
Yeah, Lex Later here, it says, or Lex Later says, this cult of personality is reinforced and amplified by various media organizations, large and small, that profit from the grievance mongering and adulation. And that's an interesting point, because I wonder whether this is the first cult in history that's had such a formalized framework that is supporting its existence, really, in terms of, say, Fox News, Newsmax, OAN, these kind of, and actually the information spaces that are far more widespread on the internet, these podcasts and spaces that really do much more. So often we've understood cults as being these weird organizations that exist somewhere deep in society that we don't really interact with. They're these others in the dark places. You know, Scientology in the UK at least is something you don't really hear about. Its headquarters in East Grinstead, and that's about all we know. You know, whereas actually this isn't a cult that's existing in the shadows. This is a cult that is operating and trying to take over the running of the country. And so in order to do that, it's being supported by these very formal networks.
That's right. But let's be clear about something here in terms of media, because media is its own animal. And there's a simplistic view of it. And it's true enough. I mean, the media, for all pragmatic purposes, is supporting Trump's campaign and has since 2016. But that support really is manifested in more minutes of coverage, because from the very beginning, Trump has been the opposite of what has been in the political world. He's the guy who comes along and kicks everything over and knocks everything down and laughs about it. And there's never really been anything like that in this space. Politics is supposed to be kind of boring, and he brings this whole reality TV thing into it. And the media originally was just so flummoxed and blown away by the outrageousness of it that they couldn't stop watching it. And unfortunately, that stuck. And Trump plays the media using their own model against them because they're an attention economy. And so as long as he does things that demand people's attention, they keep supporting him by showing that. And there was a point after the first election, I think, when the media collectively realized their responsibility for that and went ahead and kept doing it anyway. And that's the part where I have a real chip on my shoulder about American, celebrity news reporting, is because they kind of, you had celebrity media, which was, it just had no integrity of any kind. It would just put whatever was out there to create drama and get clicks and views. That's celebrity media in a nutshell. Political media and real news media became that under Trump. And that's how they've been, and there are many reasons for that beyond Trump. It's the attention economy model and all that. Probably a whole podcast, different conversation, but I just felt I had to bring that up. I don't know.
I mean, so I tagged you in on this thread the other day, which was Matthew Remski, who's another cult expert, who said, and to remind people, there's this 39 minutes of Trump swaying in a town hall recently where he didn't answer questions, and instead he sort of played 39 minutes of music. 39 minutes is an awful long time, right? To sit and you've gone to a town hall, you want to listen to what Trump's ideas are on the economy, on this, on that, and you are listening to music for 39 minutes. So Matthew Remski, a cult expert, says Trump surrendering tonight's Q&A for 39 minutes of his favorite songs while standing on stage, awkwardly conducting at times, echoes many instances of cultic leaders who, exhausted, ill, and at the end of their cognitive rope, outsource their emotional dominance subroutines to canned music they personally find exquisitely sentimental. As traumatized narcissists, they are seeking comfort and avoiding work, but also assume that their core memories of pleasure will make their power and soul transparent and accessible to their followers. Yes, it's weird. No, the campaign gives no explanation because the logic is a sealed system. Believers lose themselves in the choruses. Handlers know there's nothing they can do but to keep him propped up. Kristi Noem, so the woman who was standing with him, who shot a puppy, as we found out in her memoir. Anyway, Kristi Noem knows her inner circle's status depends on staying bright-eyed. The leader of the group I was in for 3 years, so he was in a cult, maintained a Trump campaign-like schedule of a daily 2-hour sermons. Over the years, he increasingly relied on his DJ to fill the room with emotional overwhelm whenever he gapped out. He was 78 too. He air conducted the tunes. He had a shrinking repertoire of melted talking points, but because there was never any substance to his shtick, he didn't struggle to remember details that were slipping away. He just turned to the music. All he had ever done was generate a mood. Then he died of a stroke. Maybe helpful to keep in mind, for Trump followers, the default to pure emotionality can be effective right up until the end. For some, the intensity of their bond might increase because for them, As for him, the effect was the point. The effect was the point. They weren't there for the platform. This kind of goes to what you were saying, that it's not about the content. It's about either the framework or the general emotionality. And just to finish, there are people in the crowd who are uncomfortable or who can recognize the signs or who get bored and leave early. But for those really caught up, that 30 minutes of music and reverie might feel like the most direct and intimate contact they've ever had with him.
Yep, I thought that was a spot-on observation as coming at it from the cult angle. Absolutely true.
Yeah,
it's emotional. I don't know what else to say. Emotions are powerful stuff, way more than people think. Most people have no idea how their emotions drive their life. I wish that we're different. I mean, emotional intelligence is a very important thing, and it needs to be part of critical thinking, by the way, because critical thinking is not just about logic and reason, because that's not how we are. So if you think you're a good critical thinker and you know nothing about your emotions, then you don't know anything about how you think.
Yeah.
And it's really important to understand this, because it drives our behavior, and it skews our ability to even engage with facts. So it's important stuff.
So a really good point here. So Per Lewisberg says, and thank you for your support. Just for clarity, because I'm a little confused on this, is Xi Jinping in communist China and Kim Jong-un in North Korea right-wing problems? Right.
I should have said authoritarian. I shouldn't have said right wing when I was referring to those guys. That was my mistake. I'll own that.
Yeah. You're absolutely right. Yeah. And I was just going to say, I would say Xi Jinping is not a cult, and that is an authoritarian left. Well, it's really interesting when you define what China is from an economic point of view, whether it's left or right. It's a really weird kind of quasi-capitalistic, blah blah blah. So I won't go into that. But I would also say that he's not a cult. He's not in charge of head of a cult. However, you could argue that Kim Jong-un is an example of a kind of left-wing cult or certainly an authoritarian cult that isn't. Yeah,
three generations of cult. Very carefully manicured countrywide cult in North Korea. North Korea is a special case. Yeah. And it is a cult under a leader who is a cult leader. Kim Jong-un, the Un family, the Kim family rather, very culty. China, harder argument to make. China's a way bigger place than North Korea. And size matters when it comes to cults and scaling cults and controlling them. So it's a tough. There's delineations to be made there.
Yes, and that's a really good. By the way, that's a really good question to ask, because yes and no. Like I would say, Xi Jinping, no. Kim Jong-un, yes, definitely a cult. And just want to put this one to bed. So Constellation Pegasus then says, anyone remember Russia? Interesting how that turned out to be false. Cult behavior to pile on with no evidence. What? Okay. So my point about
false. It was proven. What?
Yeah.
Do you just like watch Fox News and that's all you do?
Exactly. This is. I don't know if you know Constellation Pegasus, but I've been doing videos on the Ukraine war, 5 videos a day for 2.5 years without a day off, like not even Christmas Day, and all my holiday days. So like this is my wheelhouse. And by the way, the Mueller report absolutely 100% showed that there was Russian interference in the 2016 elections. You've got the social media companies coming out and saying 100% there was interference in the 2016 elections. What it didn't show, because it wasn't equipped to show, was that there was collusion. So what you find Trump does is he smashes together interference and meddling with collusion. And he says, because there was no collusion, there was no interference. And it explicitly says that's not the case in the Mueller report. So go and read the Mueller report, because you are either misinterpreting it or not understanding it. So collusion means that Trump asked for support and was getting together, and they were like working together to undermine the US elections. Whereas actually it was either collateral or they got involved in the US elections, but proving collusion was too difficult for the report to be able to do, and it wasn't really their remit. That's really important, to the point where, and sorry to kind of digress too much here, Chris, but Mitch Mazarol answers this by saying, and thanks, Mitch, for your support. Constellation Pegasus, just for you. Thursday, July the 25th, 2019, Senate Select Committee on Intelligence Chairman Richard Burr, Republican, North Carolina, and Vice Chairman Mark Warner, Democrat, Virginia, released, quote, Russian efforts against election infrastructure. In other words, go and look at that. You will find that that is absolutely, you are not correct there.
Yeah.
Just a couple more points, Chris.
Yeah.
Ricky Johnson, long-term supporter. Love you, Ricky. He's been on here as well, I don't know if he would call himself a member of a cult. He was in a religious sect called, oh my goodness, what Norwegian religious cult, this is my multiple sclerosis mind. It just smashes words up in my brain. I'm just going to go and Google that. But he was in a Norwegian religious sect, which is very small. I don't think it's culty, but it was anyway, certainly religious. And I've interviewed him and his son actually on my podcast here. So I wish more people understood cognitive dissonance reduction. I think it's one of the most important psychological things to understand. I quite often observed what I would consider otherwise decent people get hand wavy about Trump's despicable behavior. Any thoughts on that?
Absolutely, because it goes hand in hand with cult membership that people will do that. You'll find people justifying bad behavior all over the place for in-group, out-group reasons, but when they're doing it to an irrational or unreasonable level, that's when you know you're dealing with some kind of a cognitive dissonance issue of magnitude of problem. It's a problem now because the person can't engage with reality, and that's the beginning of what ends up becoming delusory behavior, right? If you allow it to go unchecked and the person just keeps committing harder and harder to this belief set, then they separate themselves from reality. And those of us who have been in a cult understand exactly what this feels like. And it feels very normal when it's happening. And that's got to be real. There's a problem with talking to people who are in a cult mindset is they don't know they're in a cult mindset. And so I can talk about this all day long, but this isn't how I'm going to go about changing people's minds who are in a cult mindset. All I can do is talk about it here. It takes a one-on-one to really dig into a person's emotional foundation for why they believe what they believe. And it's often has nothing to do with what you think it is. It might not even be political. I mean, people go in for Trump for all kinds of reasons that have nothing to do with politics. So there are interesting reasons at the bottom of why somebody believes what they believe. Often counterintuitive, often very, very surprising, but it takes a one-on-one to actually dig into that. And there isn't any other way to do it. I wish that there was, a mass intervention process or something, but actually, and it's going to sound a little weird for me to say this, but that's what propaganda is. And we don't really like that very much. So that might not be the best way to go about handling this problem.
So Ricky, by the way, it's Listidianism. So I did remember eventually. So that was his background, and actually that brings us on to I guess where we'll meander to the end, which is how you get out of cults and talk about that. But before we do that, Ricky Johnson added, as I educated my way out of a religious cult. Well, he says, so he says it's a religious cult. I wonder whether Listidianism would be defined as a cult. I'd have to look into that. Interesting one. So anyway, that's the religious movement. It's Listidian Lutheranism or Apostolic Lutheranism, a pietistic Lutheran revival movement started in Sapmi in the middle of the 19th century, named after Swedish Lutheran state church administrator and temperance movement leader Lars Levi Listidius. Well, actually, considering it's that one person that it seems to be integral, that even though he's died, that I think maybe it would be a long-term cult. I don't know if that's a thing. Like, can cults exist after the death of a cult leader?
Oh, absolutely, they do. Oh, yeah. I mean, it's like L. Ron Hubbard died a long time ago. New leadership rises. Yeah. Of
course. So Ricky says, I left the Republican MAGA party. So he said, I was surprised to realize that I was in a political cult too. Interesting sort of crossover there.
Yeah.
Julian Roster says, would you, and thanks, Julian, and thanks, Ricky, by the way, would you say supporting a particular sports team is a type of cult, or is that just tribalism?
No, it's just tribalism. And like I said, there's nothing wrong with tribalism. Where it's going to happen whether we want it to or not. It's built into us. You can go to Jonathan Haidt, right? 90%, ants or bee or whatever, and 10% monkey, right?
Right.
We are social creatures. There's no way around it. We're mammals. We group. We do, and we're built to. So that's going to happen. The cult is a line in the sand where it happens too hard, where people become irrational about their group membership. And anybody can make a mistake in a moment. Cults are not a one-off mistake. Cults are, like I said, they're purposeful. So, so odds are most sports teams are not cults. But you get the wrong mix of people together and they can become one. So,
yeah, interesting. So, talking about, and I was listening to Stephen Hassan talk about this as well. You have this idea that people in cults are brainwashed, and that might be a result of sort of dissociative personality disorders being like active, and people not just becoming a different person, but almost replacing their foundations with another level of identity, if you like, and you're trying to tease that apart and get back to their original identity and original sense of who they are, as or maybe our sense of who they were, is difficult, and we can be often guilty of doing this. So Hillary Clinton did this with like deplorables, which I think is an interesting. So she kind of like saw there as this kind of MAGA cultism and said, okay, you're all deplorable. And of course, that's just grist to the mill and is not going to help to disabuse people of their belief system. And so this is a bit like Jonathan Haidt said, rather than do this, you kind of need to nudge people away, riding on top of an elephant, and just be someone maybe in their in-group or wider in-group and nudge them, and then nudge them, and you nudge and nudge and nudge, and it gently happens after time. So, how do we, like, how would you see the best way of disabusing people of their belief systems? Sorry, and just Hassan said it's all about treating people with respect and speaking to them, like being interested in them. Oh, when did you first hear about Trump? When did you first, like, how did you get and treating them with warmth, and then that's the best way of getting a route into maybe disabusing.
Absolutely. There are a lot of different tactics to use in approaching somebody who's in a cult to get them out of the cult headspace. You're trying to dial it down in terms of their belief set. And how do you do that? It's emotions. You're dealing with the person's emotions. You're not going to throw a bunch of facts at them and they're just going to go, oh, what a fool I've been, because that's not what's keeping it all in place. It's emotional, right? And so you got to deal with the person at that level by finding and engaging with them respectfully and keeping them. Here's the key. You can't let them go into fight or flight. You can't get them pissed off at you or defensive with you. And that's why social media is such a horrible place to try to, change people's minds, because they double down, right? They go into the place where you're attacking me. I am now becoming defensive. And when people are defensive, they are not open and receptive to hearing your new ideas. They're shielding themselves from you. And that's why you can never have a hostile intervention. It doesn't work that way. You can't use cult tactics to get somebody out of a cult. This is why the old 80s deprogramming crap didn't work either half the time, because you can't kidnap somebody, browbeat them out of their beliefs and think you've done a good job. You have to get them to change their mind. And the way that I used to talk about this, and it's still a good way to talk about it, is people have a kind of, you could consider that when they're debating or there's something contentious, it's like a fortress in their mind. It's like a thought fortress. And the thing about thought and belief and the prison of belief is there are no walls that are stronger than the ones you will create for yourself in your own mind. No one can imprison you the way you can. So when somebody else is trying to engage with you and you've got this thought fortress going on where these are my ideas and nobody's going to change my mind, The only way to get in there is to be invited. You can batter at those walls all day long with your facts.
Interesting.
And get nowhere.
Yeah.
They have to invite you in.
Like a vampire, you need to be invited in, so you can suck the lifeblood out of them and get them to join your vampire cult. No, that's like all wrong.
That's right. It's like that. I try to make that analogy because I think it's easy to understand and easy to get. And until they open that door, you're never getting in. So
so this is like in psychology, this is sometimes called the backfire effect, which is the more you present rational information to someone against their position, more often than not, they will entrench in their own original position.
100% of the time they will.
We can see this in like arguments about X or Y politics. Even now, like me and Constellation Pegasus, we're arguing with each other. Will I have actually disabused him of what I think are incorrect opinions? Probably not. In fact, he will probably entrench in those opinions, and this is the way of things. So unfortunately, as you've said pretty much like this earlier on in this talk, Chris, is that you can't reason people out of positions they never reasoned themselves into. And that's the problem, is that trying to change people's minds is far more psychological than it is rational, and that's a problem. So we can go to people in a cult and say, well, look, you're obviously wrong because X, Y, and Z, and you can present them with like these, a young Earth creationist. You're obviously wrong because the world isn't 6,000 years old because of all of this reasoning. And the young Earth creationist will be like, screw you, because and here's an interesting idea, and I don't know whether you've thought about this before, Chris. Sorry, I'm just going off on one here.
Yeah, no, please.
Is that I've talked about this before with regard to disabusing people of, say, young Earth creationism viewpoints, is that there's something called terror management theory, which is to do with people's what's called mortality salience, which is their understanding their own death and how salient that is with them. So and I don't know if this is the same with cults, but with religions, if you challenge, say, young Earth creationists and you give them all the information they need that should rationally cause their worldview to fall apart in terms of the world being 6,000 years old, right? The issue is that their belief that the world is 6,000 years old is also connected to their belief that they will live forever in paradise, in heaven. And so therefore, by disabusing them of this easy to disprove idea that the world is 6,000 years old, actually what's doing the heavy lifting here isn't like the content of this belief, but what it's connected to in terms of like, well, I'm going to live forever in heaven, and if this is wrong, then I'm not going to access this. So I can't be convinced outside of my view that the world is 6,000 years old because I don't get to live in heaven forever then. And this terror management theory, this idea that we are managing our own terror, our own deaths, is really prevalent in that kind of belief system. So that actually there's no point me disabusing you of the idea that the world is 6,000 years old, because actually you will refuse to believe that just by point of fact that it will invalidate you for living forever.
Exactly. Thank you for putting that all there and giving that name to it, because that's exactly what I was talking about earlier, right? In terms of the emotional foundation on which the cult belief is based. And it's going to be something that's not obvious. And it's going to be something that you're not going to guess what it is. You're going to have them tell you. And that's why they have to invite you in, because they're never going to trust you enough to tell you if they think you're just going to make fun of them, or if you don't respect them as a person. You don't have to respect anybody's beliefs.
Yeah.
A lot of beliefs are ridiculous, but you got to respect the person who has the belief. And they know immediately whether you do or not. We all know whether we're dealing with somebody who respects us or not. It's not like rocket science. Again, we are built to see and perceive these things, because this is really the stuff of survival. Is who can you trust? We trust people who respect us.
Yeah. And it's funny in a live chat going on at the side over there. There's people like slagging each other off now because we've got like left and right, or this and that, and then people, it's like, while we're having a discussion, I'm like, well, you've got to be nice to each other, don't insult, don't, you know, get invited in.
Right.
Meanwhile, everyone's just going hammer and tong at each other, like virtually punching each other in the face. Like, I'm not listening to Chris.
Yeah,
Rubbish.
that guy. Exactly. No, I know. It's the hard road. Okay, I understand this. This is the hard road. It is so much easier for us to give in to anger. I've been there 1,000 times. I've screwed up so many times because I get triggered or mad or upset or whatever in the moment. You know, just because you know this stuff doesn't mean it makes you, this perfect person. It's a discipline that we have to learn in order to get along with other people, and they're not going to practice it. We have to be the one to take the high road and be the bigger person, and that's hard. Sometimes we're not in the mood. Then if you're not in the mood, don't try it, right? Go wait till you're in the mood, because you're only going to get so many chances, especially with somebody who's actually in a cult. They're only going to give you so many times to take a shot. Most of the time it involves seed planting, not direct confrontation and argument.
This is a really important point. Like, you plant those seeds and let them sort of nurture them in subtle ways, or let them grow themselves. You plant them in fertile ground, and hopefully they will, you know, I've worked with people where, as you go into the, I remember working with someone that she would never, if you went in and said, right, I think we should do this X, Y, and Z, then she would never take that on. But if you sat in a meeting and just put these ideas out there, then sometimes like a month later she'd be, oh, I think we should do this, and like, yeah, that's what I suggested a month ago. But do you know what I mean? Like, that direct kind of like, we should do this, or like, has anyone thought about this? No, okay, I'll just leave that there. And then you just let that seed. So for you personally, what, and I know we talked about this last time, but what, just for the audience now, what brought you out of your, what were the seeds? What was your journey out of Scientology?
Sure. Well, I got myself out, just so everybody knows. Nobody had to come and do an intervention on me. But the way it happened was a long, years-long process of issues or moral problems, moral conflicts that the cult created in me. It violated its own rules. It punished me when it shouldn't have. Things like that, right? Where injustices happen to a person, or moral outrages, maybe more precisely, happen to a person, and they find themselves disagreeing with what's going on, and they're like, wait a minute, I'm disagreeing, this isn't right, and they shut it down. But it sits there and it festers, and then another one, and then another one, right? Because these are true sort of breaks with the person's reality, right? They think the cult is one way, but then it demonstrates it's not. Every cult does this because they are abusive groups. They can't help themselves. Eventually, the facade cracks and the awful comes out. You can only be a Scientologist for so long before they're keeping you up until 3 a.m. trying to get you to empty your bank account and give it to them. That's going to happen at some point. So it's a guarantee that eventually they'll probably pop out of it themselves, but that can take years. So the seed planting helps speed that up, and mostly it's done through what I would I think, if I was trying to get it across most quickly to people how to do it, I would refer you to street epistemology. It's asking questions. It's not giving facts to a person. It's making them think about something. Because remember, all the stuff I said about cults, they're trying to get you to stop thinking.
This is a Socratic dialectic. So Socrates famously won arguments by asking questions. So this is a Socratic approach to changing people's minds. You ask those leading questions, and this is how coaching works. You could give someone the answer to their problems in their workplace or their life. You could sit there and go, you should do this, or you can ask them questions that lead them to release that understanding themselves. So it's facilitating they're coming to a conclusion, and that's kind of what you're saying, which is empowering people to come to their own conclusions through street epistemology. Chris here says you will never get a sudden conversion from a Trump supporter, let's say a cult member, or anyone with a fixed set of beliefs. I would somewhat disagree. I'd say you can, well, not talking about cults specifically, but people who have a worldview that suddenly change their opinion. So, for example, a committed evangelical Christian that goes very quickly into atheism will go into a militant atheism. So if you do a 180 switch, you end up being as evangelical as you were for your original belief in your new belief. It's like someone who goes from eating, I mean, I say this as a vegan, someone that goes from eating meat to being a vegan can become like an evangelical vegan. You will know about what I do, blah, blah, blah. Or do you know what I mean? Like, rather than gradual changes of belief, lead someone, I think, to maybe a healthier new belief that you aren't often as evangelical about. Maybe, I don't know.
You're absolutely right. And it has to do with the fact that you drop the beliefs, but you don't drop the behavior, the habits that you formed in how you act and how to respond to people and how to be with people. That all stays the same when you come out of the cult, because that's not part of the beliefs. That's how you're acting.
Yeah.
And people don't differentiate these things. And so they're still wearing the cult clothing, even if they don't hold the cult beliefs. And so they still act like a cult member. And that's what the cult recovery and therapy and work on yourself after you get out of a cult, that's why it's so necessary, because it's easy to change your mind about beliefs. Okay, good. Xenu's not real anymore. Great. Right? I don't have to think about Xenu anymore, but I'll still treat people the same way I did when I was a Scientologist, right? And that's what you have to get over.
Which leaves you very vulnerable to adopting a new cult, which is like you're so used to. And this is what I say about Russia and Putinism, which is that Russia is a country, I think there's a good analogy here, hopefully. Russia is a country that's never really experienced democracy, right? And so it's gone from Tsarism to Bolshevism through to communism, real centralized strategic planning with totalitarian rulers. And then you get to the 1990s, all falls apart, but it doesn't really take on democracy in any meaningful fashion and goes to oligarchy. And now you've got Putin back again in basically a new dictator, like a new style dictator there. And they've never really experienced actual power, enfranchisement. The whole population is thoroughly disenfranchised to the point where they're not striving for democracy there because they've never freaking known it. Do you know what I mean? Yep. And so they were so willing to have Putin back as a dictator, not necessarily willing, but not against that, because they've never really experienced anything else. And so therefore it was like, oh yeah, I was a put down citizen here, and now I'm a put down citizen here, just under a different regime. So there's this element that if you are disenfranchised as a cult member for so long, that when you come out of a cult, you're like quite vulnerable to going back into just another cult. Maybe, I don't know, I'm speculating here, but you have all the framework in your psychological framework to make you vulnerable to cultish behavior going forward.
Yes, a lot of the priming and education that happens in various countries in this world very much primes people, right, for cultic or conformity behavior, right? Because a cult is it comes from the word culture. It's a shortening of culture, right? And it's a mini culture. It's got rules and dress and this and customs and all the things, and that's basically what it is. So getting people in and out of them it can look interesting, I guess I'm saying.
Yeah. Okay, well, so we go for some thanks. Sorry, just some quick thanks before we close. So Kobe Jack gifted 5 ATP memberships. Thank you so much, mate. I really appreciate that. Paul Gilbert says, I'm paying for enlightenment. So welcome to the cult, Paul. Thank you for that, my friend. Who's now a new member, probably as a result of Kobe Jack. Thank you. The Weasel gifted 5 ATP memberships as well. This means I do need to give more to my my cult followers here at Atypical Philosopher, because actually I've let this gather cobwebs here. Ronnie Franken, so everyone forgot the meaning of equilibrium. We were talking about equilibrium earlier. Thank you to all the people whose questions I've already gone through. And I guess finally here from Paul Gilbert, my cult is very small, says Paul. I'm its only member and the membership list is closed. So sod off.
There we go.
Cult of one. Brilliant. Thanks, Paul.
Very nice.
Look, Chris, is there anything else you think we have missed out on? Anything you want to anything you want to talk
Throw
about?
out there. I wanted to say this just to some of the people who've been kind of snarky during this whole thing, right? Is find out more about cults. It really is in your best interest to do so. And then a really interesting question to ask oneself in terms of, you know, our own beliefs and stuff is, and this isn't a gotcha, it's a real legit thing, is how would you know if you're in a cult?
That's a good question. So, yeah. So, what would your answer be to that?
Well,
all the things we've just been talking about.
Yeah, it's a question designed specifically to promote thinking, not answering particularly.
Yeah. So what I'm trying to do here, and sorry about this, someone's just mentioned my favorite comment. Someone's just said my favorite comment here. And I was just going through my records over there. So Richard Bennett says, the only cult has Ian Astbury as a vocalist. I've got about 6 LPs, 6 vinyl LPs in that box there of the Cult. And I'm going to see the Cult, the band, in November on their 40th anniversary tour. So Richard Bennett, the Cult, are one of my favorite bands.
There we go.
I didn't even think to make some Cult references tonight. So thank you for that. And by the way, it is right, JR, leaving the ATP Cult is just a button away. You only have to unsubscribe. But if you do, I will hunt you down. I will hunt you down and I will take you out. And I don't mean for dinner. Anyway, look, Chris, I've really appreciated this. And please, people, go and find Chris at mncriticalthinking.com. The psychology of coercive control. Go and help him out there. You'll find out what he's all about. Buy his book. And on YouTube, Chris Shelton, Cults, Coercive Control, Recovery, Offering Reason in an Unreasoned World. Of course, unfortunately, he doesn't talk about the back catalogue of the Cult, the band. That's, unfortunately, you have to go somewhere else for that. But I should have worn my Cult t-shirt as well. Goodness me, so many missed opportunities. I couldn't even find my records, my fingers. When you have MS, you can't feel your fingers, and it makes everything's so difficult. Anyway, that no one needs to know that. Dude, I've really, really, really enjoyed this chat, mate. And I know this almost didn't happen because it turned out that I like hit Chris on Twitter because I follow Chris on Twitter. And it's been like a couple of years since I interviewed him. And of course, in that time, he's forgotten that I interviewed him. And like I obviously remember this, but Chris has done many, many interviews. And I hit him up on Twitter when he talked about Trump being in a cult. And I was like, let's talk about that, thinking he'd know exactly who I was. And he's like, yeah, okay, we can talk about that. So I contacted him on email and added on to this email thread I'd had previously about Shelley Miscavige and something to do with Scientology. And then he rightfully got confused. Like, we were just going to have a little chat on the side, not a live stream about Trump and cults. We were going to talk about Shelley Miscavige on the side or something. And then like literally 20 minutes before this went live, he was like, are we doing a live, mate? I don't even know who you are. And I'm like, oh my God, this is all going to go wrong. This is just going to go so wrong. So thanks, Chris, for like, you know, just last minute, just talking about
not a problem. And let's do another one before 2 years passes. I'm around. I'm easy. I love, as you can see, I love to talk. So
yeah, for sure. You and me both, my man.
Let's do it.
Yeah, and it was a great chat. So as you know, thanks guys, really interesting from John Hare. Really appreciate that. And cheers, Jonathan, Chris, great chat. And more importantly, I met Billy Duffy once, top chap. Billy Duffy is a guitarist for the Cult. So Julian Rossiter, I'm so jealous of you. Anyway, enough talk of the Cult. We were talking about cults. Chris, thanks, mate. Stay on the line. And yes, let's do this again. Thank you very much for the very lively live chat. Thanks for having arguments and not killing each other in the live chat. This is always going to be divisive when you have certain people who like, for example, we're talking about Donald Trump. We are saying he's a cult leader. And if you are someone who likes Donald Trump, you are arguably in his cult. And therefore the pushback, that backfire effect will be, and it's difficult, right? And we're not necessarily right? But we are building a case that we think we're right, that Donald Trump is a cult leader. And therefore anyone who is a fan of Donald Trump is going to take that quite hard, and it's going to cause arguments. So yeah, there's no surprise that happened. But hopefully it's been time well spent, as Mitch Mazarol said. So anyway, thank you, Chris. Again, you take care of yourself, stay on the line, and thank you to all the live chatters. Toodle pips.